Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for showing up. Hopefully a few more people will come in the next several minutes. We have a really good agenda. I'm Matt Applebaum. Our other co-chair, Joanna, is here as well, of course. And there's a slightly revised agenda. All the topics are the same, just the order of things changed a little bit. We've got quite a crew from RTD here. Thanks very much for all of you taking the time to join us. And, Joanna or Roger, do you have anything that needs to be said before we go into the first item?
I don't think so. I've got a couple of questions for the group at the end of the meeting, but we should get going.
Okay. Joanna, you're muted there.
There, I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Well, in that case, first thing on our agenda is an update on the FAIR study and equity analysis. And I think most of you remember that we've looked at this once or twice before, at least it's kind of its initial stages, while they were waiting to hire a consultant and really get on with it. This is one of the really big deals, I think, that RTD is undertaking over the next year or so, and that could make a big difference in how RTD really structures itself and how it reimagines itself. So with that, we'll turn it over to Bill, who is once again nice enough to join us and give us the update. Bill.
Thanks, Matt. And I wanted to also introduce Chris Quinn, who's also on the call here. And Chris is the project manager for the FAIR study. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will work okay. Oh, because the host has disabled my screen share. So you might, I don't know, Roger, if you need to enable me.
All right, there you go.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Can you see it? Is it in presentation mode?
It is now.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So like I said, I think I talked to this group a few months ago as I think we were in the middle of the consultant selection process. Just to give you an update of where we're going. We have, since I talked to you, we've hired the consultant. We've been, getting all ramped up to kind of really do a really big push for public and stakeholder engagement that we're going to be starting here shortly. But so what I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of an overview of kind of how we refined the kind of process a little bit, give you a little bit more detail about how we're structuring the outreach, and talk some of the overall goals and kind of next steps that we're going through. So to start out with, and I think you guys are pretty well aware of this, but I think I talked about this last time. Why are we doing this study? Last spring, about a year ago, our general manager asked us, wanted some of us on the staff to get together to start talking about FAIRs, because a lot of people were giving us input about it, that they were too high, too complicated. So we kind of started our looking at it back then and determined that we needed to do a very comprehensive study. So the other thing, obviously, that's happening that you guys are all very well aware of is we've had declining ridership over the last several years, even before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, we've had seen some pretty severe impacts to our ridership and to our service and our ability, to get operators and all that stuff. And then lastly, there is a changing customer base. The travel patterns are still shaking out from the pandemic, but I think, we can probably all agree that, a hybrid work environment is probably here to stay. And that is affecting, us and who was riding RTD. So those are all things I think we want to take into consideration as we're looking at fairs. But in terms of what our specific goals are, we've defined 3 primary goals. One is equity, which is really, focusing on those who are transit reliant and those who, basically need transit in order to meet their daily mobility needs. And, in doing this and in doing any kind of fare change, we need to follow Title VI. There are specific rules and requirements by FTA that we need to follow. And, and we're doing that. I mean, we need to look at fair and equitable access to all kinds of protected populations, but we're actually going beyond that and looking at other, kind of areas that actually go beyond kind of what the traditionally defined, diverse communities are. Looking at things like, going beyond access status, we're looking at, working with LGBTQ, we're looking at working with actually a new approach to outreach, where we're actually going to be contracting with nonprofits that have strong relationships in the community to hopefully target and get to more input than we have traditionally received in the past, really focused on some of those disenfranchised communities that we've had trouble dealing with or trouble accessing in the past. Another goal is affordability. Obviously, we've heard a lot about that, in terms of prior to this, but our focus here is making sure that what the service that we are providing aligns with the value that people are paying. So that making sure that there is that 1-to-1 ratio, and it's not, some people are overpaying for a service and some people feeling they're underpaying. I mean, it's really trying to align value with the service received. And then lastly, but not least, and this is probably a huge thing, particularly internally within RTD, is simplifying our fare structure. Make sure it's easy to understand. We've heard a lot from our operators about the complexity of having different levels of discounts for different types of people, and for if you have this card, it's one thing, but you have another card, it's another thing, and it's and the different levels of the other one that we've heard a lot about is our fare boundaries and the different zones, and those are complicated. I don't understand that. So we are really going to try to take a hard look at those. So these kind of set the framework for us in terms of how we're going to approach this effort. In terms of scope, I've talked about the goals, but we are going to reviewing our fare structure and our Title VI program. Having our consultants do that, looking at what's working and what's not. We're doing a round of interviews internally right now with different departments to get their perspectives. We are going to be reviewing other fare structures from other agencies. We've got a list of about 10 peer agencies that we're going to do some benchmarking on. We've got some specific case studies that we're focused on that simplicity and some of those the affordability issue. Some agencies that have looked at this fairly recently, so trying to gather some information from those. And then, as you may have read, a lot of agencies are pivoting off the current COVID situation and making some changes to fares to address their issues with ridership and trying to attract more people. So we're going to look at those as well. And out of that, we're going to be identifying some, I'll say, conceptual level fares and talking to people about those concepts, and then whittling that down into, a more detailed set of alternatives that, where we're getting into trade-off discussions, because, again, we can't be everything to everybody. And we know that, but there is going to have to have a discussion about trade-offs. Probably the big one is, well, if you lower fares, we're going to have less money, which could mean less service. So how do you want to look at that? And those kinds of conversations, and simplifying the system. What does that mean? What are the trade-offs associated with that? So we'll be having a lot of kind of conversation about that and evaluating how those different kinds of detailed alternatives form to come up with hopefully a recommendation that will probably be some sort of hybrid of those in terms of what, we hear back from the community and our writers about, or customers about what they like, and, what we hear back from our board and stakeholders, and then provide a recommendation to our board that will ultimately go through a Title VI analysis, which is, again, a key piece. Anytime we propose a fair change, we have to look at Title VI and are there, communities that are being disadvantaged, communities that are being disproportionately impacted by, a fair change. So we'll have to do that kind of analysis as well. And then outreach, which is really what we're focused on now, because the initial big push for this is going to be hearing from customers. And, we've kind of divided it into I'll say is 4 main milestones, which that first one is kind of hearing from customers and stakeholders about, what are the challenges, what's working, what's not, and to try to get that as a basis for what we need to focus on. Obviously we have some of that, but we're going to be, one of the things that we are going to be doing is doing a fairly detailed online survey that we're going to be rolling out. And Chris, help me, I think it's going to be early next month, that we'll get to people to, and we can send it to this group. You can send it to anybody you want. We're not doing it. It's not going to be a statistically valid, but it's going to be an online, but it is going to certainly give us some good information about trends and themes of people like and don't like. The next phase, which will be kind of in the early summer timeframe, will be looking at those conceptual options based upon what we've heard from the customer, and kind of share some of the feedback that we heard, as part of that process. And then kind of that third big piece is getting into those detailed alternatives and doing a much more, in-depth analysis of the impacts to ridership and revenue and stuff like that. And then from that, developing a recommendation that we would put forth to the board. And as a part of that, we would take it out for public comment and a formal public hearing process. So that's kind of the framework for the engagement process. Now, that the audiences that we're focused on, obviously, first and foremost, our customers. I think, a lot of times what we have done in the past with our efforts is, the typical RTD approach is we establish an advisory committee, and and they are the ones driving it. We're taking a little different approach this time, as we are really trying to have the customers drive this, and then having stakeholders, and folks like yourselves engaged in this, but listening to what we're hearing from customers and using that as a way to drive the process, because I do think that is something that our general manager, Deborah Johnson, has really pushed with us, is she wants to make sure that that is the driving force behind any changes that we do propose. So, going back to the timing of this, I talked about the 3 different milestones and then the formal public hearing process. This gives you a sense of timing. Like I said, we are this month later, hopefully, cross our fingers, next week we'll be launching our website, and then rolling out a social media campaign and rolling out the survey that I talked about, and then going into that first kind of milestone of outreach, you're really hearing back from the customer, and then through the kind of the rest of this year, trying to get feedback and kind of window down into some options, and then next year really focused on a recommended approach that would ultimately go to the board in April for adoption. So then that would be kind of the point where we said, okay, here's what the changes are going to be, and then after that, there's going to be a startup period where we're going to have work with our finance group and others to get things like ticket vending machines changed and stuff advertised on our website and everything else. So it won't, April 2023 they won't change overnight, but that will be the point where we can say, here's when things are specifically going to change. And part of this piece, like I said, is stakeholder outreach. And, and one of the things that we're doing with this, which is a little different than we've done in the past. So we're going to have a series of feedback panels that's going to really be the focus and consider public input and, customer input. So we've got 3 panels. We have an equity panel, which I said, Carl Green, which I believe he's talked to your group before, is kind of heading up this, and we're focused on working with a lot with community groups and, others that are established, kind of focused on these areas, low income, youth, seniors, to try to get, make sure that that perspective is first and foremost in this process. We have the past program group. The last fair study that we did was focused on the past programs, and many of you may remember the past program working group. This will be not necessarily a subset of that, but this will be focused on our past programs and those that are actively engaged with our past programs today. And then lastly, but not leastly, we'll have a jurisdiction feedback panel, which will be made up of what I would call more traditional stakeholders at the various levels of government that will want to weigh in on our fair policy and fair structure. So like I said, our schedule, a little bit more detail here. We're kicking it off this month. May is when we'll kind of have some of that conversation. I mean, April, May, have that conversation on that first milestone. Then June, July, kind of have the second milestone, and then kind of in the fall, really focused on the, getting into the detailed alternatives. And then, like I said, kind of leading towards a board action about a year from now, a little over a year from now. So, one of the things that I think that, to try to maybe head off this question a little bit, because I know that early on, a lot of feedback that we heard when we were developing the scope for this effort was, oh, how come it takes so long? Why at that point it was 18 months, and that was 18 months from this last summer, so we're even extending it beyond there. We really do think it's critical that the outreach drives this, and we think that this allows us to have a much better product at the end of the day. And so we are taking a little bit extra time to focus on that outreach. So I think I wanted to address that, because I know some folks have come to us and said, why do you have to take so long to do this? I think hearing from our customers and the way we're structuring this, hearing from a customer as well as hearing from these feedback panels is going to take a little bit more time, but we think it's going to be worth it. So kind of our next steps in terms of the next couple months, like I said, we are going to be launching our website hopefully next week. We're going to be populating those feedback panels, and the consultants will be starting to look at our existing fare structure. Like I said, they're doing interviews right now as we speak with different departments, and they're going to start that benchmarking, looking at other agencies and kind of how we compare to others around the country in terms of fares and our programs that we have in place. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and see if you all have any questions. Let's see, where's my screen here?
Thanks, Bill. That was really excellent. And hey, to me, it looks like a really good approach. I've got some questions, but let me see if anybody else has. You can virtually raise your hand. Stephen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I got a few questions. So what % of RTD's income are fares?
Well, right, pre-pandemic, we were like 15 to 20% of our revenue was coming from fares. Since the pandemic, and I don't think anybody from finance is here, so they can corroborate my estimate here, but I think it's, closer to 5 and maybe upwards of 10%. So it's gone down fairly significantly since the pandemic.
I take it with the 15 to 5% of RTD's income. This is how crucial do you rank fares for RTD's income?
Well, one of the things I didn't talk about that I think it's different with this study than we've done previous studies. We always had revenue targets in the past, and that's always been a primary criteria for us to say, any alternative that we have must meet these revenue targets. Our general manager has really said she doesn't really want to do that. And our finance group is, on board with that. So we aren't going to be using that as a kind of a milestone criteria. So we are looking at the potential for lowering fares. that will be part of the process.
What variables do you collect for fare data?
Well, and I'm not the full expert. I might even throw a lifeline out to Chris, or if he has anything to input on this. But I mean, we collect, what are the different types of fares people use, and the way it works is, when we have people that pay cash fare, we have people that use passes, we have people that pay discount fares because their status, whether they're a senior or youth. So we have data that we do on ridership, and one of the key statistics that the consultant will look at is what is our average fare pay by mode. So what do the people pay on the bus? And so that they can use that information to then forecast, as our ridership, hopefully, as we change our fares. And there's the other pieces that list elasticity in the economics majors out there, elasticity of demand. We'll say, if you raise fares this much, you will have this corresponding effect on people's desire to ride, or lower, alternatively lower. So they will have that. They're experts at that. So they have that. So we'll be pulling data together like that to develop a fare model that will say, well, if we did these things and we lowered fares over here, but, rate or, change the discount here or whatever, here's what the impact would be on revenue and ridership. And that will be a fundamental metric that we'll use along with some other things that will be developed later on, not initially, but probably in the fall.
And you're basing this off average for mode, just average.
Yeah,
mode,
that'll be part of it. And I may be oversimplifying it. It is a very detailed, our consultants are experts. I didn't talk about our consultant team, but it's the 4 Nines team, which has worked with us actually in the last 2 fare studies, very well schooled in fares and done a lot of fare work across the country. And they have a great team that have a lot of expertise in this. So we're going to rely on them to collect all the right data. And we're going to, we have information on our fare programs and other things that will all go into this model that will, look at what are those impacts that we can assume would happen if we made some changes.
That's all the questions I have. Pastor Dell, looks like you got some questions.
Yeah, you might have touched on some of this, but I was wondering if you had a little bit more details in respect to the outreach that's going to be done to get community or ridership responses on some of these plans. I think that's a great direction to move in, but I'm just curious how you're going to make that connection with the riders and the community.
Well, one, I think I'll start with our new approach with multicultural outreach that Carl Green is leading up. And it's a new model that I think that Carl has really pushed, and I'm really excited about. So one of the things that we're doing was we are actually creating contracts with established nonprofits and others in the community. And I don't know, Chris, if you have any names off the top of your head that we could throw out, because I know that Carl has been working on like a half dozen or so of those organizations as keys to kind of that have strong connections with the community and our riders. And so that's going to be a tool that we're going to be using, and we'll use them to help facilitate meetings, to disseminate information, help us with translation, other things like that I think will be really important, and hopefully create a better connection for us to those communities that we've traditionally not had a very good track record of reaching in the past. I think we have a very robust outreach plan and outreach team to support us, that we're going to be doing some traditional stuff, the social media stuff. We're going to be doing this online survey that we're going to try to get out in any different form. We're going to have it available in 4 different languages. We're going to have it available in Spanish, but there's the other 2 languages that are kind of probably most prevalent in our region, which is Chinese and Vietnamese. So we're going to have it available in those languages as well. And just trying to just be much more open and engaged than I have seen us being in the past, and looking for those opportunities and using these feedback panels as another piece, but like I said, relying hopefully on that customer to give us that data and that perspective that we can use to drive the process.
So Bill, I just would like to maybe add one thought to that process. I think that it would be beneficial to have some input from members of this citizens advisory group to give you information on some of those groups to make sure that we, have a covering. I think we have a pretty decent representation of various parts of our community that are also part of the citizens advisory team here. So, and I think that's one of the reasons we are here. So I would hope that there would be members here that you could reach out to make sure that we're getting that information disseminated to key areas of our community. Thank you.
Yes, and and you guys are going to be heavily involved. Like I said, you'll probably be seeing Chris and I fairly regularly to come talk with you about various stages along the way.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. So just two comments came up for me. One, I don't want to steal Michael Davies' thunder because I saw this further down the agenda, but there's a proposal out there to go fare free on transit at some point this summer and maybe future summers as well. And so I just had a question about maybe incorporating that pilot into the study somehow and just taking advantage of that opportunity to really measure the impact on ridership and equity while we have that moving.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Maybe answer that one, and then I'll have a second follow-up comment.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've been monitoring that, and I've actually been engaged with Michael on the Spare the Air Day conversation. So we are going to monitor that and look at that and see what data we can gather from that. We're also going to have our consultants look at some of the other fare-free options that people around the country have done. But I'm gonna say this because this is coming from our general manager, is that typically what we have seen on the fare-free side, and this is changing because a lot of people are reacting to COVID and looking at this a little bit differently, is that it's always been very nuanced about what has been fare-free in the past. If it's a specific line or category of individual, whether it would be youth or senior or somebody else like that, or maybe even a smaller kind of demographic. I mean, the one a lot of people use is Kansas City as an example. They have a fare-free program, but many people don't know that's just the city of Kansas City, and the city of Kansas City is paying for it, and it's only about $9 to $10 million a year that they subsidize. But when we look at our budget pre-pandemic, given that, we were about $140 million in revenue from fares. So I think, I'm just going to say this, and I'm channeling my general manager, is that, fare free will be looked at, but I don't think it will ultimately end up being an alternative that we say is we'll take through the kind of the latter part of the process. It's because I just think that there's so many challenges with it. But I do think you're right. We are going to gain some good information from this summer in terms of what we see happen. And we do have some information from what we saw early in the pandemic, obviously a different situation. But, and I think, if I'm right, I think Bill Van Meter told me this, that there was a fare-free experiment way back in like the early 90s or something. Roger may even know something about that. I don't know. But so yeah, so that is it, but it will be something definitely that we'll be looking at.
Okay, cool. My other comment was just, thinking about how do we assign a cost to transit. I can't help but think about the costs of driving, since those are the modes we're comparing here, and how, we don't really assign, the accurate cost of driving to users of the system, right? Parking is mostly free. We have one of the lowest gas taxes in the nation. We're mostly funding transportation with general fund transfers at this point anyway. And so I just encourage you to think about like how transit competes with driving. Both the real cost and the perceived cost. A lot of drivers it's sort of a sunken cost. They bought their car, they pay for insurance, and then they just choose that mode automatically. But how do we like position transit to compete economically with driving?
Yeah, I mean, and you guys, I don't know, we've been rolling out Reimagine over the last couple of months, and this question has come up, and I was just with Dr. Cog last week and saying, well, what do you guys need to do? And I said, well, everybody wants more, so we need more resources if we're going to do this. And then, yeah, if we want cheaper, less expensive fares, we're going to need, even more. Or the trade-off, which is going to, again, part of this process, we're going to say, well, we have to provide less, which I know nobody wants. So that's just it's this fundamental conversation and that we need to have. And we hope that there is this, strong desire to have more, and there is, and people willing to pay for it.
All right. We're running a little long, but that's okay. This is a fascinating topic, actually.
We have Patty scheduled now.
Yeah, that's all right. So we've got
And Chessie's very efficient in her presenting, so she can go flip through her stuff really quickly.
Yeah, okay. Actually, let me do this in order. We have Jim and Ben and John, and I've got a question, and then we will wrap up. So Jim.
Yeah, Bill, do you feel you've pretty well defined the core ridership or narrowed down the core ridership so that you can really zero in on your process and the timelines by targeting that group of core ridership rather than doing more of a scattergun shotgun approach?
Yeah, we have certainly have done a fair amount of evaluation on how ridership has changed. Obviously we know what routes we've retained ridership and what routes we haven't. So again, that is certainly going to help us focus our efforts. And like I said, we're also going to be looking at people who maybe used to use this and maybe don't. I mean, so there's going to be, I think we're trying to get, at everybody that would like to use transit to get their opinion about fares so that we can use that as a basis for, how we proceed forward.
Ben?
Hey, Bill. So to what extent are you looking at kind of the technology aspect, and in particular going like cashless and into a kind of really robust smart card approach to fares?
Well, the fare study itself is going to look about where we're going with technology is going to affect how we might change fares. I mean, I can say separately, as an example, we're going to go with the account-based ticketing later this year. I think this summer we're going to start implementing that. I can say, as I know my staff's been involved with it, we're going to go after a big Dr. Cog grant, hopefully, to advance that beyond where we're going to start, which is going to be more of having an open system, which is much more flexible, and we can use things like credit cards on validators and other things like that. So that's definitely where we're going to go. And I think the fare study is going to basically say, given some of that framework, what can work and what doesn't work from a fare, structure standpoint.
But and from a revenue standpoint, I mean, can technology increase fare revenue in the sense that, people prepay for stuff that maybe they don't use, or they use it more often because they don't have to fumble around in their pocket for cash and, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, I can say just anecdotally, I know that since we've introduced mobile ticketing, that has kind of really taken off, and people like that idea that, it's fairly simple. But we also have to take into account, those people that may not be as comfortable. So we're, and that's part of the challenge of making a fair structure change is if there's a segment of the population that doesn't have a smartphone or doesn't like to use a smartphone, how do we accommodate them? And so that'll be part of the analysis as well.
Thanks.
John?
Thanks. No, Ben and I had the same question. My question was on how the FAIR study relates to fare collection technology and improvements at RTD towards that end. So I think there's overlap there. So thank you.
All right. And I'll just chime in. People ask great questions. Just a couple of quick things. Since you have answered that there are no fare recovery goals at this point or requirements, I guess my question is, to be blunt about it, when you go out to the various communities, you're going to be, honest with them about how if we do lower fares, which I think is likely, these fares are arguably a little on the high side, that could affect service levels. And there are trade-offs that everybody has to understand. It's very easy to come in and say we want lower fares, especially if you're a transit dependent and low income, and they should have lower fares. Got it. But what does that mean for service levels? We've seen many surveys around the country that, at least pre-pandemic, said that service levels are more important than anything else.
Right.
Getting people to use transit.
No, I mean, you're totally right. I mean, that is a big part of the conversation is about trade-offs. And that is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest. If you have lower fares, you don't have as much resources. And so how do you make that up or don't make that up? And that usually impacts service. So what does that mean? And that's the conversation we have to have. And, the idea that, there might be some way to supplement things, maybe that comes out through this. I don't know. We like I said, we don't have any predetermined outcomes at this point, other than trying to meet the goals that I talked about.
Okay. Well, no, as long as you're, straight with people about some of the trade-offs, that's at this level of conversation, that's perfectly fine. I think people need to understand that, that's just how it is, and they still may use that outcome, and that's fine, but it would have an impact. Only other question I've got is real simple, and it's kind of about your plan moving forward. You've got these three groups that you mentioned. I can't remember which you called them anymore. Looking at three different aspects of this. Now, I know you're going to be coming back to us at the CAC from time to time, but I'm just wondering if folks on the CAC would like to be at least considered for being on any of those panels, is there a way we could do that? I think we do bring, some knowledge and representation of our communities, as well as that's a good way to keep the CAC up to date on kind of what you do in each of those groups. So,
well, I mean, at a minimum, we can take that back to the group and talk about it. At a minimum, I mean, these meetings are going to be open to the public. If anybody wants to, just listen in on them, they can certainly do that. We'll take that back, though, the idea of having a CAC member on one of the panels, and kind of take that to our team and talk about it.
So Matt, we also might want to talk about, does someone here on the committee want to volunteer for monitoring those committees? Even if they're not on it, we could have three people take responsibility for each one and just listen in and participate on those meetings.
Yeah, and we should do that at our next meeting when we're hopefully getting together and talk about various assignments we might take on. But yeah, Bill, I think maybe having somebody on one of the panels would be great, but regardless, Roger, I think you're right. It'd be good to monitor it so we can be kind of kept up to speed. Anyway, thanks so much, Bill. That was a really excellent presentation and great questions. And this is going to be fascinating as it goes. can have such a big impact
Yep.
on RTD. Obviously, we want to be kept in the loop, and we look forward to hearing from you and your team again.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
So I think I'm up next, but Roger or Matt, could you tell me how much padding you've got here? 40 minutes of TOD is a lot for a lot of people. So.
Oh no, come on! I could do TOD all day.
I think 30 minutes. You've got at least 30 minutes, maybe a little more. Whatever you need.
Careful what you wish for, Matt. Okay, so I'm Chessie Brady. I'm the Transit Oriented Development Manager at RTD, and we're going to do a little TOD 101 here. Yep. So first, basics. What is transit-oriented development? When we talk about TOD, we're talking about good TOD, what we are looking for when development is happening near transit, where development is working with transit and transit is working with development. And that means that we want compact development. We want it to be dense, which generally means high. The universe is kind of within a 10-minute walk of the station. That's the area we consider to be a potential TOD area. Ideally, we're seeing a mix of uses: residential, retail, commercial. There's definitely especially in Denver, we're seeing a lot more residential, which is great. We don't have any issue with that. Outside the building, it should be a high quality, urban design, walkable, all of these good things. Kind of generally, it's just best practices in urban design, period, but it's happening at a transit station. One of our shining example of TOD in the Denver region is, of course, Denver Union Station, which you all know better than I, since I'm a fairly recent transplant, but looked like this, and then looks like this. And from a numbers point of view, in the DUS area, we have 3,000 residential units, millions of square feet of office, retail, hotel rooms. This is a national example for TOD, and it's also kind of a once in a lifetime or once in a city example, I think, once in a region. But definitely a lot of what we see here is we see the density, we see the mix of uses, it's walkable, good landscaping, all of those important things. What we didn't get into too much in these days of TOD was parking, and I won't I'll try not to belabor the point of how important it is to keep parking ratios low at developments near transit, but I'm not very good at not belaboring that. So you'll hear about parking quite a bit in this presentation. So why do we do TOD? What's the point? The benefits are, on a large scale, less sprawl. I like to think that if residential units are being built at a transit station in an urbanized area or suburban area, that means they're not happening out in greenfield developments, which require, create higher emissions and also require more infrastructure investment. They also, having people live at stations gives them access to the transit system, makes it easier for them to get around. From a transit agency perspective, the benefits are in the ridership and the fare revenue. Of course, we just talked about fare revenue, but we do like getting fare revenue. And so if people are living at the station, they're more likely to ride. When the development is happening on RTD land, we also have the potential to get ground lease or sale income, which we can put into operations. So that's another benefit specifically to us. And TOD is happening in the region. Our station areas, so that 10-minute walk around every station, account for about less than a percentage of all the land in the Denver Boulder MSA. And yet in those tiny little red circles on the map, 25% of the multifamily development that occurred in that whole area, the gray area between 2005 and 2019, was right around our stations, and 31% of the office development. So we are seeing concentrations of development right around our stations, which is a very positive story. Again, if it's happening at our stations, that means that people are being able to access, their workplaces, their groceries, everything that they need to do, and also requiring less infrastructure. Whoop, there was some. So as far as RTD's role in TOD, on the big scale, we support station area planning, a lot of stamps, station area. Oh, I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if everybody can hear me. Okay. Stamps occurred in the 2008 to 15. Most stations at this point have a very localized plan for what development the community and the jurisdiction would like to take place there. And RTD is very active in supporting those planning initiatives as they continue to occur. We also are constantly exchanging information with jurisdictions and with developers. And then one of our key roles is to coordinate between RTD operations and engineering and developers to make sure that everything is safe, but that we're also, getting development near our stations and getting the ridership that we're looking for. When it comes to, again, our land that RTD actually owns at a station, which is typically our park and rides that are active and people are using them less than before COVID, but they are still using them. Then we call that joint development. And in those cases, we'll coordinate or negotiate land deals. We coordinate with the local jurisdictions, we're negotiating with the developers, and then we're working with the RTD board to get approval to sell or ground lease the land to the developer. And so that cooperation with the jurisdiction is really important because they're setting the zoning, they're setting the height restrictions, they're setting the parking ratios, and all of that impacts the potential for TOD in the district. They also can often help with gap financing. So it's expensive to build at our stations. It's higher density. There are often infrastructure challenges, and jurisdictions can come into play a role where they're putting tax increment financing into place, or they can contribute to the infrastructure improvements. And to be clear, we're not doing this, RTD is not the developer. We're not actually building the building. We're working with a developer who's creating a proposal, getting the land together, going through the entitlement process with the jurisdiction, and then working very closely with us to actually get the building built. And I have a few examples, and I'll go through these pretty quickly, but Alameda Station was an early example of TOD that actually happened on RTD land. So RTD sold this, it was a park and ride and bus turnaround to the developer, D4. And because of local planning that had happened in the area, determined that the RTD customer parking was not necessary, basically turned this station into a neighborhood station as opposed to a park and ride station. And so instead of this park and ride, what we have now is Alameda Station, which looks particularly nice at sunset. It's actually quite blue in real life. And the developer contributed to some of the infrastructure as far as relocating tenants, $2.5 million. Denver and the urban renewal area put in $20 million for infrastructure as there were significant drainage issues in the area. And RTD essentially contributed our parking reduction. We didn't require the developer to rebuild the 300 odd spaces that were on site. And we also contributed to construction. So a lot of cooperation to get that project done. Boulder Junction as well. It used to be this lovely dirt pit and then became a very walkable and progressive roadway with affordable housing, restaurant, commercial, residential, so as well as a bus facility. And that was through extensive coordination and cooperation with Boulder and the developer, and funding coming in from many different sources. Old Town Arvada is another example. So our original plan here was to put in, when the G line was being planned, was to put in surface parking and a bus transfer facility. Arvada really took the lead there and said, that's not what we want. And we worked over years with them. I say we, it was really Bill, worked over years with them and with their urban renewal authority to move that parking over into a structure, consolidate the bus transfer there, and then that opens up the land for residential and for retail. And that's, I think they've broken ground now on this Trammell Crow on this residential property. And that's going in with kind of an acceptable level of parking in my view, given the restrictions and preferences of the local community. But with the, they're selling they're marketing the units as with their proximity to the rail, and also, I mean, it's a strong bus hub as well. So that's kind of ideal when we're taking a surface lot and then turning it into something that's really contributing to the community and also creating revenues for RTD in some cases. And in that case, RTD contributed the land value as well as the money that was going to be spent on the garage, or excuse me, on the surface lot. And Arvada put in 24 million. Sometimes when I give this presentation to them, they say that's very low and it's more like 40 million, but 24 million is the number that we have on file. And we also had some grant funding for that one. And then lastly, this is a project that's going on right now. So 29th and Weldon, there's a community parking lot that RTD owns that we worked with the city for many years, and in the fall put out a request for qualifications for a developer to respond with a condo building that would be at least 25% affordable. And so we've just recently received those proposals and are reviewing them, but very excited for the potential for a developer to build an affordable condo building here. That's something that's really not, it's only happening in one other example in Denver, and condos themselves are hard to build because of construction defects and potentially the market, but affordable condos are extremely difficult. So hoping to make that happen on this location. And then looking forward, the properties that we consider for development as far as being on RTD land are the 80 plus park and rides we own, just 30,000 parking spaces, which is a lot, as well as remnant parcels along our tracks. And so we kind of keep tabs on all of these park and rides for their development potential. And many times people ask why isn't it happening already? Why aren't there buildings either next to the RTD station or on the RTD park and ride? And it's because it is really challenging. In many cases, the local density, either by zoning or just by the market, won't support the kind of development that would actually generate ridership. I think I've mentioned the infrastructure costs, rising construction costs that was been on this slide since pre-COVID, but even now we're seeing that really magnified, and also local high parking requirements. So if jurisdictions have a minimum per unit or per bedroom requirement. And on RTD land, we have the added complication of generally requiring that developers replace the RTD parking that they're building on at a 1-to-1 ratio, which sometimes just doesn't work mathematically when it comes to the land values. I think at this point I wanted to ask, is there anybody have a favorite park and ride that they think should be developed that I could, tell you why we haven't done it yet? Yes, Stephen.
9 Mile. I ride an 83 9 Mile all the time, and I would love that. It seems very prime to be developed.
9 Mile. See, I don't pay any attention to 9 Mile because I don't think development can happen there, but I don't remember why. Bill, is that in Greenwood Village?
That's by Aurora, on 225.
Yeah. Is it technically in Greenwood Village though, Bill? You could nod.
No, it's Aurora.
It is. It's in Aurora.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. No, it's in Aurora. But
it's garage.
It's a garage. Yeah. So we don't have any land unless we were to build on top of the garage to do anything. Now, a lot of what's been happening around there across the street at the King Supers, or the old King Supers, but I haven't been over there for a while, so I don't know what's changed. I mean, there was a big push by the city of Aurora to do that redevelopment and build a bridge. It's been challenging because the bridge has gotten more and more expensive over time, and it's been a challenge. So yeah, the impact on that side is because we really don't have any land to develop on, because there's already a structure there.
I was thinking of Dayton, which is actually in Greenwood Village, even though it's sort of separate, and Greenwood Village is not interested in development.
Yes.
Well, the Arapahoe Park and Ride was supposed to be developed a little while ago, and it never happened.
Right.
It's Greenwood Village is not interested, and that's one that they own, and we just squat on, I think. John, did you have one or any other question?
No, I do. I'll take you. a station I love to hate, but that I use occasionally, Southmore Station.
Oh,
That's a rough one.
Oh my God.
It's something like 700 spaces, and it used to be 85% utilized. And definitely we've had lots of developers inquire on that one, because it's, looks primed for development. But in fact, there's a height limit there. There's a view plane coming from Southmore Park, I think, that limits development to 3 stories. So once you ask a developer to also replace our parking spaces, there's no way to make any money on that development, because we're going to charge them, or it's going to cost them $25,000 per space, and they can only go up 3 stories. So there's no money there yet. I am hoping that one day the city council will get rid of the view plane there, but I leave that up to them.
Yeah, and Jesse, thank you very much. It's one comment. I mean, listen, I'm on this committee as a citizen representative. In my professional life, I'm a planner and community development director.
Okay.
All of those surface parking lots are development sites in the long run. And I would simply say I do think that there needs to be a change in mindset, both at the agency and in the region, that these surface parking lots are sacrosanct or really important. They need to go, including and particularly on the suburban periphery. It is that park and ride model to get to the downtown core is changing rapidly. So anything that the agency can do to partner with local jurisdictions, county and municipal, I'd certainly just encourage that. So
I love to hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
we appreciate that comment, believe me.
Yeah. Danny?
Hi. Some of this is ironic for me because I sometimes go to the Bellevue stop, sometimes Southmore, because if I go to Bellevue, my train no longer goes to where I need to go. I have to transfer now. It's one of the ones that has been taken away with the pandemic, but it's a little itty bitty park and ride lot. And some of them I know are sprawling, like I go to Southmore and it's just huge, but Bellevue's is really small. And I've wondered, how do you balance all of this, which I think is important, everything you've presented and the future of our region's growth and all of that? How do you balance that if there is success with getting more people to get rid of their cars, maybe go to a park and ride lot? How do you plan for that transition? Possibly, if spaces are taken away for park and ride, is there potential for more garages instead of huge lots? Like I know at Arapahoe there's a lot and a garage. So I want to know, if you take away parking spaces for this development, which is a good thing, how do you balance that? Because we also want people to do who don't live so close to get rid of their cars as well. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's that's the key issue, right? Is where is it appropriate to or possible to remove parking spaces, and where is it not, and how do we coordinate? I mean, I think one thing is that TOD is happening at a relatively slow pace, so it's not like we're going to make a decision here and then it's going to affect us poorly somewhere else. We're going slow enough that we kind of have a chance to know what we're doing and to plan accordingly. I mean, traditionally, our requirement has been that we will require developers to replace our spaces 1-to-1, so there will be no loss. What we've recently, and let me just click through here. Yeah, I have a lot of slides, but I don't need to show them all. So we did recently pass an equitable TOD policy, which basically puts affordable housing in the conversation with parking, so that we're getting a trade-off. If we are willing to be flexible and not require a developer to replace the parking 1-to-1 if they are building affordable housing, and if the residents of that housing will use the system more than the parking, with more ridership than the parking previously provided, if I said that correctly. So we want to make sure there's not a net loss of parking at any given station. Affordable housing is Not only is it really needed in the region, I think we're all familiar with that, but it also works well with transit. People who live, low-income people are more likely to be riding transit. And so it makes a lot of sense for them to live at our stations, and we're more willing to reduce a parking requirement in order to enable affordable parking. But yeah, I mean, we hear that question from both sides, and we say, we hear people saying, get rid of all the parking, but also we need people to be able to drive because we aren't able to provide the full feeder service, at least currently, that would otherwise allow them to connect into higher frequency systems. So it's definitely a balance, and we look at it on a station by station basis.
Thanks.
Matt.
Sorry, but since you jumped ahead and mentioned affordable housing, which is great, and you actually gave that as an example in some of the places that did redevelop, I'm just curious. I certainly know how this works in the city of Boulder, but and to some extent in Denver, but elsewhere, how are you defining affordable? Is it permanent? Who manages this? How do you make sure you get what you want? Again, in Boulder, I know exactly how it works, but not every jurisdiction is really set up to do that.
Yep, that's very true. And I think we've seen, I'm just trying to figure out how to stop sharing here. I can jump back in if you like, but our goal, if you saw on that slide, we have a goal that over the next 9 years at this point, that 35% of residential units built on RTD land will be affordable. And in that case, we're defining affordable according to the local financing requirements. So if it's a low-income housing tax credit building being financed that way, then it's affordable. If it's Denver through their housing and stability department funding it, then that's affordable. Or Aurora, in a jurisdiction that didn't have a sophisticated take on what affordable means, then we would go by probably a LIHTC low-income housing tax credit standard of 30%, 60%. 90%, 110%, depending on the market. But we're able to be flexible. As far as making sure that it stays affordable, our preference is to ground lease the property. So in that sense, we have a permanent arrangement with the developer to make sure that it stays affordable. And that is, our board's been really clear that they would prefer to ground lease, and in some cases, it definitely makes more sense. If we were to sell the property, then we would put covenants on the land, and also make sure that the financing is baked in. I mean, in the case of Denver, they're going to have to, if they're getting the financing from host, then the requirements are baked into that already. But still, we would put covenants on because that's very much a concern of our board as well.
All right, well, that's really good to hear, because there had been a long period where jurisdictions, even Boulder did this some time ago, foolishly weren't quite so careful. Things weren't permanent. Things weren't guaranteed. We got smarter early on. Denver has gotten smarter, but again, there are smaller jurisdictions that don't do a lot of this. And if you're going to be chipping in either directly or indirectly with land or getting parking, whatever it may be, bravo to you and the RTD board. But let's make sure we get what we expected and it really is permanent. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben?
So I'm developing an affordable housing project in Denver. I mean, it's not by your definition TOD, but it's at Broadway in Florida, basically. So we're less than a mile to the Broadway station, less than a mile to Evans, less than a mile to Louisiana and Pearl. We have robust bus, obviously on Broadway. I mean, so those of you that know the term walkability score, it's got a huge walkability score, right? But the key issue in an urban site is parking. And I think that for everybody's benefit, in Denver, the city has downzoned parking ratios dramatically for affordable housing. And in in my case, in my project, there's basically 60 units of permanent supportive housing. So it's 30% AMI or under. And these are actually going to be formerly homeless persons. And, obviously can't afford cars and, that sort of thing, right? The other half is workforce housing, and it'll be at 50% average median income, right? So the new Denver zoning requires 1 park per 10 units.
Yeah.
So technically, on a 120 unit project, we only need 12 spaces, right? So we went for low income housing tax credits last fall with 20 spaces, and we were bragging about how we were doubling the zoning requirement for the city. And Chaffa crushed us.
Yeah.
And so I think what's really important for people to understand that the parking issue isn't necessarily a city zoning issue. It's really a lender financing issue. And a lot more education needs to be directed toward lending institutions, particularly Chaffa, right? I mean, you really can't do a hardcore low-income housing project without tax credits. And for Chaffa to be so conservative on parking, it's really a barrier to building because, as Jesse, you sort of indirectly indicated, to build structured parking it's really $30,000 a space, and that's just not affordable under any circumstance if you're doing affordable housing. So a lot of work really needs to be done, I think, in terms of educating lenders, but even I think Chaffa in particular, as to how projects like this with close access to transit and certainly high walkability scores just really don't need parking in the way traditionally everyone has looked at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for supportive housing. I dropped my education in the chat box there that we've had so much trouble convincing lenders and some jurisdictions over the years of their excessive requirements for parking, that in the beginning of the pandemic we walked through, I think 80 or 90 private developments, both affordable and market rate, to see what the max utilization of their parking surface and structure was. And the bottom line is they all have too much parking. And so we put that in black and white in the report attached. Please use it. We've encouraged lots of developers to share it with their lenders, and it has made a bit of a difference because we have this localized data showing that the market, the affordable market in particular in the Denver region, does not require that much parking. Happy to have more conversations with you about that if you're interested. As I said,
I'm definitely interested because we have to go back to Chaffa in August, and a lot of people on my team are like, well, we just got to show Chaffa that they're wrong. And, that's a tough argument when you really need the money, right? There's no alternative but low-income housing tax credits for a project like this. And so, I'd be happy to continue that conversation with you.
Yeah, sure.
And we've engaged Chaffa and had conversations with Chaffa too. So, I mean, we've tried. And we may not always be talking to the right people. We may, and I don't know if we've had a lot of recent conversations, but we certainly have had a lot of conversations with them in the past.
Yeah, and they're in a tight spot too. I think sometimes they'd like to believe they don't need as much parking, but they think that they need to require more. Anyway, let's talk some other time.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you.
Jim? You are always, you're still muted. I'm not sure if you're speaking yet. There we go.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a shift in discussion here, but is there still I assume this policy addresses BRT as well as LRT and commuter rail.
Well, so
Go ahead.
The policy addresses land that RTD owns. And
Okay.
and so it certainly applies to our Flatiron Flyer lots, but it doesn't apply. It only applies to park and rides, essentially, not
Okay.
Colfax, great opportunities for TOD, but we don't have any control there because we don't own any land.
Okay. Yeah, and the question really was whether there's still a generally there had been a reluctance or a stigma of TOD development associated with BRT. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing any changes in that attitude, and if there's successful BRT projects, throughout the US and other places where TODs have been successful along BRT lines.
I think, sorry.
And what those lessons are, what those lessons learned are.
Yeah, I think that the jury is still out. There's no consensus or agreement on whether, basically on whether there's a market for people who want to live near transit, thinking that BRT is transit. And I think I was presenting to, I think it was Charlotte a few months ago, and we started talking about that. And there was a developer on the panel who said, no, that's not TOD. I'm not going to build next to a bus station, a bus stop. Like, I don't care how often your bus comes. So that's definitely an opinion. But what we see on US 36 is certainly development, interest around our stations, whether that's because of the transit or just because of, there's also a highway interchange there. It's hard to come to a conclusion. But I think that if it's high frequency transit, and people recognize that, then it makes sense for them to live near it. But yeah, no, the jury's out. And it's often a frequent conversation. Stephen. Oh, sorry, Matt, were you speaking?
The question I wanted, probably a two-parter. So with this transit-oriented development, it's mostly housing focused, or is it housing focused?
Right now, it's very residential focused. I think the office market is pretty uncertain in the COVID context, so there are developers still building office. But generally what we see, the most interest that we see from developers is residential, sometimes with ground floor retail, coffee shops, and the like.
My follow-up is what is RTD's development around solar? You have a lot of prime location too easily. If we're talking about kind of putting in developing sustainability as well as income sourcing, developing for like car charging, microgridding, selling energy back to the grid, to have a reliancy in electric with eventually the switch to electric buses and using light rail. What is RTD's stance on that for development?
I think from a development perspective, we encourage developers to be using the latest LEED standards and everything else as far as sustainability on their buildings. When it comes to our existing surface lots or garages, where solar could line the top of them like they do at 61st and Pena, has solar covering, but that's not an RTD park and ride, that's the city or the airport. But that's a good example. When we've talked about it in the past, there have been concerns about the kind of the financial complications of the public agency being involved with solar companies. But I know there are other public agencies to do it. I think at this point, I would say we're open to it, but it's not something we're pursuing actively. But we do get approached fairly regularly by solar providers who would like to partner with us. And I know that there are people in the agency who are thinking about it. That's not probably a great answer, but I know it's on our minds, but I'm not sure what the progress is at the moment.
All right, does anyone else have a question? Really good discussion on both of these first topics. we'll post, I'll upload the presentations to the CAC Dropbox once I receive them. And I've already uploaded the TOD report there if anyone wants to look at it there.
Great, thank you.
All right. Matt, I don't know if you're speaking, but you're muted.
All right, well, I shouldn't have been. Roger was getting antsy about us running out of time, and that's a good role for him to play, but we kind of interrupted you so much with our questions. Did you have anything more in your presentation that you really wanted us to take a look at? I mean, even if we don't discuss it right now, just something to leave us with, something to think about.
I think the only thing I didn't really talk about was the fact that we have a very detailed unsolicited proposal procedure, which is how a lot of developers make contact with us. And it includes, make sure that we get feedback from the whole agency when we're looking at the potential for development. So we have these parking conversations, we have operations conversations, we reach out to the board at the right time. So and if any of you would like to, if you are developers and would like to propose building on any of our park and rides, you can do so via the unsolicited proposal procedure. But other than that, I think your questions covered it all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that should be the next CAC proposal. We could build a development on one of the parking rides.
Yeah, it's easy. I'll help.
Yeah, we'll work on that at our next meeting. Thanks so much. That was great. That was really interesting. All right, Roger.
Now I'm doing it talking while I'm muted. I think Michael Davies is next. Oh.
Yes.
He's still on. Okay.
Hello all. Thank you, and it's good to join you all and give a quick update. I don't have a formal presentation, but my understanding is that you all just wanted a quick update on the topic of fare-free transit and what is kind of going on with the legislative process there. So RTD has certainly been engaged in both, or at the administration level and with legislators at the General Assembly, with this potential topic of the state funding fare-free transit for a period of time. And I think RTD has received certainly a lot of outside support from stakeholders and elected officials throughout the whole region that do support RTD taking a step into that direction and being an active participant in whatever the state program is that gets developed. And so that kind of leads me to, we don't have a bill yet, and I haven't seen any language, so I don't have a lot of information about what direction the state is going to go or any details about that. RTD, I think is playing a willing and active role. We want to be a partner in this kind of experiment with fare-free transit and see what kind of data we can learn from it. And so I think with that, I'll end there and happy to take any questions about fare-free transit program so far.
Well, I'll just say we've talked several times about how this is going to play out, and we've had some concern, I think, about it being done in the right way, which would really cause people to change their travel behaviors, as opposed to in kind of the wrong way, which would sound good, but wouldn't really accomplish a whole lot. Spend a bunch of money and not give people either enough advance notice or enough certainty or enough long-term planning ability that they actually, wake up and say, okay, I'm going to take transit today, which is hard to do unless you really know what's happening and you can count on it for a while. So, I think it's a big deal. It's lovely that we're getting some money. but I know there've been a number of conversations in this group and others about, you know, if it doesn't really change anything, just makes us feel good, that's maybe not the best use of the funds. So yeah, hopefully you and RTD will, you know, really make it clear what you think could change people's transit behaviors in the real world, because that, I assume, is what we're trying to do here, as opposed to just, well, I don't know what, you know, the state feeling good about providing some money that didn't really move the needle a whole lot. And it's all, of course, complicated with pandemic and fewer people going to work and so on and so on. It all became very difficult anyway. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but, you know, I guess it's fair to say we've worried about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in response, we certainly, I think we share your goal of trying to attract and then retain ridership as a result of this experiment. And there are certain studies out there that do show that fare-free transit does increase ridership. You know, I think that there are limited studies on systems the size of RTD, and there's very limited data on that side of things. Most fare-free transit is done in resort towns, ski towns. It's mostly small rural agencies that have very tourist-based kind of ridership. So there are so many different data points out there, but overall, I think that, you know, we want to be a partner to the region that wants to experiment with this, and especially if we can find partnership with not only our operations team and our operators that are obviously going to be out there every day doing the work of that, and at the same time find partnership with the mayors and elected leaders of the cities and counties that are our partner in this. And we will ask them to support us through this, because I think RTD, you know, obviously we have a number of challenges, and we have our priorities set of trying to build our workforce and deliver the transit that we're out there trying to promise every day, that we are saying we should be there, but every once in a while a trip gets dropped. And, you know, we'd like to, you know, keep our eye on the goal per se, and make sure that we're supporting those efforts at the same time as supporting the potential for the state giving us some money on this effort as well.
All right, and so Andrea?
I think there's another tine to this fork. I think there should be some concentration, and it was previously mentioned. I think there should be some concentration on low-income neighborhoods getting free fares. That's just a way I've been looking for quite a while. The rich southern suburbs here just really don't need free transit. I think they're going to drive their cars even if it is free. But I'm concerned that that low-income person who's not making even $15 an hour has to put up so much money for transportation.
Has there been any thought about trying to make sure that the free or much reduced fares go to certain groups, or has this been generally looked at as just a kind of across the board approach, which admittedly is easier to implement?
Yeah, I would say in terms of RTD's initial look at, and again, kind of going back on the history of this, RTD's look at fare-free transit was kind of spurred by recommendations from the Accountability Committee. And our general manager, in response to those, said we would look at funding that's available from the federal level that funds various fare-free programs, and specifically the Spare the Air program out of the Bay Area. So our look initially has really been on trying to focus on what's been done out there. And so, no, I can't say that there has been any focus, and there hasn't been any direction from the state on going that direction with this funding and how they would utilize it. You know, I think they're planning to utilize this in a very wide range, potentially statewide. That may include busing. That may include, you know, all the other transit agencies that many of them are fare free currently through the pandemic, and some of the ski towns. I think Transport up in Fort Collins is free currently. So, but I see Bill's hand up, and if do you have any comment on this?
This was going to say, you know, this, you know, like I said, I mentioned earlier when I talked about the fare study, I mean, we are going to be leading with the equity lens on that piece of it. And just in general, I mean, if we were to look at any structural fare change that would come out of this, we would have to do an equity analysis that would show that there was no disproportionate impact to minority and low-income populations. So I think, like Michael said, I mean, right now the state's looking broadly at this, just saying, let's make transit free for everybody so we can get people more, you know, back to transit, again, which, you know, we're supportive of. But if there's any kind of permanent change, and that's what we're going to be looking at as part of the fare study, we will certainly be looking at the equity lens, and that will be a primary focus for us.
Okay. Hey, Travis?
I was going to ask a little bit, like, what thought has been put in sort of how the operations of this would go, and like if RTD is helping frame that. And I sort of asked, I think Longmont, if I'm correct, the like local buses in Longmont are free. The city like pays sort of RTD's fare, right? But in a sense, I don't know what tracking and stuff mechanisms are used. My perception is you just get on the bus and like it's, you know, you just don't pay the fare box. But I also, I've been in other cities, like I was in Seattle, and in the neighborhood I was in, they launched some new transit services, wanted to make it free, but they didn't want to create confusion. So what they did is they sent like a free production, like equivalent of like a My Ride card. It's like Seattle, it's called the Orca card, to every rider that was good for like 3 months, right? And so I could ride the bus because I lived in their target area, but other people might still have to pay or stuff like that. And so I wonder, yeah, if RTD's done any thought of like what data would you want to collect if something like this happens? And also, yeah, how could you, in a sense, frame it so it maybe minimizes your operational impact, but still give, you know, the ability for people to ride free or whatever the program ends up being?
I would say that we're still certainly in that planning process of figuring out how we will track data and you know, what we'll want to try to follow if this comes to fruition. As I said, you know, we still don't quite have a bill yet and don't have a clear direction if there'll be funding for this. But yeah, I think we're certainly in that planning process now, and that is part of consideration, you know, internally of how we put this together, is being able to answer those questions and you know, make sure that we're collecting info out of this.
All right, any other questions or comments on any of this? Or anything else going on at the state legislature that folks know about?
You know, the RTD board of directors did take a support position on House Bill 221026, and that is alternative transportations options tax credit. It's a refundable tax credit for basically expenses that employers, if they buy transit passes, there are other expenses that are eligible under that refundable tax credit. But it received wide support, bipartisan support at the General Assembly. It is kind of sitting in the Appropriations Committee at this time, but there's a lot of bills kind of sitting in the Appropriations Committee right now, and it's a little bit of a slow-moving boat at the General Assembly currently. But that bill we're certainly tracking. You know, the federal level, I would say there has been some good news for us there in that, with the agreement to fund and get an omnibus bill signed that funds the rest of the federal fiscal year 2022, that unlocks the authorized increases that were in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, or otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so those increases didn't get unlocked until the president signed this omnibus bill. So that's all of the formula dollars that RTD gets for state of good repair. That investment is a big part of why the federal government did this bill in the first place, was to tackle the state of good repair issue at transit agencies. So that funding gets updated and released now. So that's good news for us. We also kind of a long-term legislative win, I guess you could say, that associated with 22 RIF loan that redeveloped Union Station. It's a low interest loan that's given through the Federal Railroad Administration. And that loan is, we repaid it in 2014. There was essentially equivalent to a security deposit associated with that. But because of the way that that bill was written originally, that it didn't get our security back once we paid that money off. And so the tenacity and kind of determination of our congressional delegation over the last, I would say, 5-6 years now that they've been working on this to get this one-off legislative fix in Congress that allows USDOT to now return this security deposit to RTD. So
it's a huge win.
As Roger said, it's a huge win. So
8 years or whatever. I mean, it's crazy. So it took a pandemic and a war in Ukraine, I guess, or something to get it finally through.
Yeah, but that's all I have.
All right. Thanks very much for the update. Appreciate it. Okay.
Any other questions for Michael? All right.
Roger, did you have any?
Yeah, I just had a few little housekeeping items that I wanted to go over. One is just a reminder about the Dropbox and YouTube channel where our recordings are. Andrea had shared with me she is having trouble accessing the Dropbox. So I want to just, encourage everyone, if you haven't gone to the Dropbox, please check it and let me know if you're not able to get into it, because I don't see any setting that you shouldn't be able to get right in. So that was my first. I'm not suggesting anyone's going to probably go and rewatch these meetings, but the YouTube channel is there just in case. And same with if you have had any troubles accessing the Zoom meetings. I think we had one. Jim was having a little trouble. I think we've got that figured out. But if ever during a meeting or at the beginning of a meeting you can't access, please always text me, and we can figure out what's going on that front. The CAC call for applications is out, and I'll put the link to the announcement in the chat. But I've also again uploaded to Dropbox the application and the link to the news release, so that if you know people, please encourage them. We've got a year where several members, and if I haven't talked to you yet directly, I will be talking to you soon, whose terms are up and have had their 2 terms and aren't eligible for renewal. So we'll have likely five new members coming in on July 1st. And so the application deadline is April 18th, and it goes through then the review process, the interview process, and appointments at the June board meeting. And new members would join us on the July meeting. Next item, monthly bus passes. I saw Stephen mention it. If you are not as committee members, you're supposed to be receiving a free bus pass. So that comes by mail. If you don't receive it, please let me know. I don't know when it comes. I don't know what day they come. One of you all probably can tell me. So I don't know what day to tell you. If you haven't received it by such and such a date, you should let me know, but.
It's like the
if you-
28th or 29th of the month before.
Okay, so if you haven't received it by the end of the month, certainly get a hold of me and I can track down. The biggest thing is, honestly, is if one of you moves, often, just let me know. And there's like 3 different people that we update lists with, and I just got to make sure I get that done. And then finally, next April 20th, our next meeting will be at CRL in person. We're at 1137 Bannock Street. We're going to start 30 minutes late to allow just for some travel time. We'll have some refreshments. We'll be available. We really hope that if you have other meetings, or if you can duck out early or whatever to try to get so we can have as many people in person. I think a lot of us have never met face to face. Over the last, because of the last 2 years. So we're hoping that we'll have good turnout for that. And that, I think, is my list of kind of things to go over. Any questions generally or comments for the good of the order?
Thank you, Roger.
Okay. All right, well. The presentations are up in the Dropbox if you want to look at them or have any questions, follow-up questions on those. That's all been uploaded already.
Hey, Roger, why don't you send out, just to be sure, another email to everybody with how to get to the Dropbox?
I will.
Just so we know everybody's got all of that.
I will happily do that.
Okay, thanks. All right,
There's actually a lot of documents in there. I mean, it's we went back and tried to upload over all of the presentations for the last several years. But I think it is a good resource to find anything that we've talked about, background information.
Okay, well, hope to see you all next month in real life, if there is such a thing as reality anymore, I don't know. But this virtual stuff is all right, but seeing people in person would be cool. So hopefully we will see most of you. And if you can't make it in person, you can definitely still join us via Zoom as always.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks very much. And we will see you next month.
All right, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.